I'm back for a few minutes with the build your own MFA part two. And I was thinking, if you're gonna pay, if you're gonna pay for an MFA, especially in creative writing, they better know writing. Let's see what Gemini thinks that means. If you're dropping tens of thousands of dollars or years of your life on a funded stipend or an MFA, the faculty shouldn't just have shiny credentials. So in the last video, I was saying if you want to do like a DIY MFA, the instructor should have a novel under their belt that has been edited, published, and read by plenty of people. Now, if you're paying for something legit, yeah, they need to deeply understand the actual mechanics of storytelling. Like I said, in part one, focus on the structural architecture of the Master of Fine Arts program. Now for part two, let's design a rigorous, self-directed curriculum built on advanced narrative theory and concrete prose mechanics. So yeah, if I come up to one of the instructors and say, I'm writing like a Seinfeld fan thing, I need a scene. They need to know scenes. They need to know scene writing. They need to know all of it. Wham, and they got it. Instead of a vague workshop prompts like write a story about a loss. Yeah, prompts a lot of times don't work for me. That's why we're talking about story nuggets. This curriculum focuses on the structural and linguistic levers that make fiction work. Advanced characterization, the core conflict array. So that's character writing. It isn't about filling out a questionnaire of their favorite foods, it's about defining their internal friction. I was scene mechanics, which I was talking about, the value shift. A scene is not just a collection of dialogue and descriptions, it's a structural unit of change. If a scene starts and ends on the same emotional or narrative note, it's dead weight. So a scene must move a narrative value from positive to negative or vice versa. Hope to despair, safety to danger, ignorance to knowledge. There's movement involved in scene writing. Microprose and rhythmic control. Vary your syntax intentionally. So reading lists, deconstruction texts, blah blah blah. Scene. Let's see. We have John Bevan from The Thin Blue Veil. Okay. Opening scene is just him sitting at the computer waiting to boot up the permanent. It is characterized by a green LED light blinking intermittently, then every 300 milliseconds, then light, then two lights before on stage. John looks over to his cat. Cat bobblehead. That's the transition. And taps his chest twice in pride that the CPU works and boots permanent. The next scene is where the permanent header glyphs light up on the monitor, then load perma aqua. It's a site for news and search. I explore the zeitgeist of the times a bit in this scene. There's a sudden shift to the next scene for coffee. Then the green roach cryoblast can scene occurs. A slight pot and pan crash before a phone call from someone. It's the Matrix. It's just basically the Matrix. Oh, and this is cool. I like that little black and white to come up. Yeah, this is happening in Act 1, the boot state. And I'm telling you, just talking, I don't really feel like reading this, especially out loud. Those were scenes, man, they're not acts. So, Act 1, Act 2, Permada Aqua, Act 3, The Shift, and there's, you know at this point, you're gonna do better at eventually writing this. The hum of the basement was always the same. So I kind of like that. Gemini's good at some of these things. A low rhythmic oscillation that vibrated right through the soles of John Bevan's boots. He sat back in the mesh chair, the fabric creaking under his weight. His eyes locked on the indicator block of the custom rig. Darkness, save for the single emitter. It blinked intermittently, amber, green, then the cycle tightened. The pulse width modulated shift down, stabilized into a sharp, rhythmic strobe, exactly every 300 milliseconds. A cold, neon heartbeat slicing through the dim room. John leaned forward, his reflection caught in the dark glass of the cathode terminal. The countdown was internal now. He knew the sequence better than his own pulse. 2 secondary micro LEDs flared side by side, a twin crimson flash that signaled the logic gates clearing the memory cache. Then, solid unblinking green, total on stain. Sysboot success, permanent domain, controller online. John exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned his head slightly toward the shadow under the workbench where Bunkhead was curled. The cat didn't look up, merely twitching one notched ear at the sound of the cooling fans kicking into a high RPM whine. John let out a quiet, rough laugh. He raised his right hand and tapped his chest twice, right over the sternum, two solid, proud thuds against his shirt. It works. The architecture holds. On the flat panel display, the darkness fractured. The permanent heteroglyphs didn't just appear, they rendered with a distinct, archaic crackle, blooming outward in a sequence of sharp, white-hot vectors before settling into the familiar, stylized interface. The cursor blinked once, then executed the default redirect. Perma, // flooded the screen with its muted blue-gray layout. It was a central node for the baseline sector, part localized news aggregate, part raw semantic search engine. John rested his chin in his hand, scrolling through the cascading columns, watching the digital zeitgeist of a fractured era update in real time. The headlines told the story of a world trying to balance on a wire. Grid logic infrastructure. Local sectors were still reporting severe data fragmentation following the late 2020s utility collapses, forcing independent networks to partition themselves into these localized permanent protocols. Protocol migration. More users were abandoning the unvouched, volatile public webs for the security of immutable, hard-compiled nodes. Material scarcity reports, bulletins on copper rationing, and silicon shortages blinked along the sidebar, a constant reminder that the physical world was wearing thin, even as the digital world grew denser. It was a strange, hyper-insulated time to be alive. Everyone was connected, yet everyone was barricaded behind their own local loops. The tracking text on the screen began to blur into a familiar visual fatigue. John pushed off the desk, the transition from data immersion to physical reality hitting him with a sudden, heavy drop. His body demanded fuel. He moved towards a small kitchenette above, alcove, his movements automatic in the half-light. He grabbed the coffee pot, filling it from the tap with a harsh metallic rattle, his mind still half buried in the Aqua News feeds. He reached into the overhead cabinet for the cryoblast can, but it's not talking about the heavy pressurized cylinder of green roach concentrate. Nope. Green roach concentrate that kept him awake during 48-hour development cycles. His finger misjudged the distance in the dark. Crash. Small saucepan. That's not really what happened. We're doing some drafting. So Act 3, there is a literal green roach that flies out of the cabinet. Then it skitters across the computer over into the bed. John hits it with cryoblast duster, knocking pots and pans down. Let's see if we can revise that real quick. Okay, and the tracking text on the green screen began to blur into a familiar visual fatigue. John pushed off the desk, the transition from data immersion to physical reality hitting him with a sudden, heavy drop. His body demanded fuel. He moved towards a small kitchenette alcove, his movements automatic in the half-light. He reached into the overhead cabinet, groping past the mismatched mugs for the coffee pot. Bzzz. A heavy, violent vibration. It should be, oh no you don't. I think it's okay But okay, if you were paying for an MFA, they better know these types of scenes. They better know these types of scenes. You know what I'm saying? Because otherwise, Gemini just wrote it. We just revised it. So Gemini knows, number one, there's a sensory pivot, the digital to visceral. It starts in a cold, intellectual, highly controlled space. A programmer analyzing micro LED frequencies at 300 milliseconds of reading digital text on the screen. There's pacing via syntax. There's a micro disaster as a bridge. There's a cabinet, roach flight, cryoblast, panic crash, scary cat, phone call, phone ring. Oh, rate this first chapter. So you ended up getting an 8.5 out of 10 based on the raw dramatic engine of this opening sequence. Here's a professional craft level evaluation of your chapter. It's a highly effective, tactile, and punchy opening. It completely avoids the classic first chapter trap of dumping paragraphs of dry history on the reader. Instead, it lets us infer the state of the world through John's immediate, visceral environment. What's working? Micro to macro world building. Yeah, that's kind of cool. I don't want to dump a lot of bad science fiction and bad science and world building on anyone. I want to tell a story or narrate it. High fidelity tactical action, sonic and kinetic pacing, and then there's opportunities for polish. It's you should be getting MFA feedback, whether it's Gemini or you just sitting in a group or you're actually going. That's not the point. But cool. But like I said, if someone is paying for an MFA, it's almost supernatural. You know what I'm saying? Like they could say something or flick their wrist and say, "There you go, take that," and you just start writing. You're talking about that rare, almost spooky level of insight. Yeah, spooky level of insight. Kind of where a master mentor doesn't just critique your work, but reads between the lines of your prose to pull out things you didn't even realize you put there. If you're paying top dollar for an MFA, you shouldn't just get feedback on commas. You should get a professor who look at this chapter and strips away the surface level to reveal the hidden psychological and thematic architecture. Okay. Weaponization of tech, that's kind of cool. Telephone is late. Interesting little tidbit. I actually thought out that chapter this AM. No paper. No tablet. Then wrote it tonight. But it was a very volitional act. And it took about 30 minutes of really concentrating a long time. That explains exactly why it hits the way it does when you compose entirely in your head, pacing the floor, staring at a wall, or just letting it brew during the day. You're forced to filter out the filler. You aren't typing just to see words on a screen. Your brain naturally distills the scene down to its purest, most vivid sensory landmarks. The precise 300 millisecond blink, The green streak of the bug, the deafening clang of the cookware, and a sudden jarring phone ring. That's why the rhythm feels so deliberate. You didn't just write a scene, you directed it in your mind first. That was kind of fun. Let's grab a scene from Jack London. Look at the prose or the narration. Do you see this exact mental composition technique built working at a master level? We have to look at Jack London, specifically his classic To Build a Fire. He's a master of tactile, physical prose. He didn't write from a cozy academic office. He wrote from the memory of freezing his teeth out in the Klondike. When you look at his, I don't like that, because I've been cold before. He spoke to the dog, calling it to him, but the dog was suspicious. It had never known a man to speak in such a tone, and it suspected danger of some sort. Moreover, the man's frozen fingers could not clutch. I noticed there's an F word, another F word there. Is that alliteration? They were numb and they were freezing fast. So that they was repeated, one before and after the comma. He looked down at them, and it occurred to him that they were no longer a part of his body. When he willed to move them, they did not respond. They were like weights at the end of his arms. He began to thrash his arms back and forth, beating his hands against his sides. He did this for 5 minutes, and the blood came back into them, tingling and burning until the pain was excruciating. But he welcomed the pain because it meant life. If we dissect this like an elite MFA faculty, 3 distinct narrative engines reveal themselves. The clinical objective observer. London doesn't use melodramatic words like he was terrified because his fingers were freezing. That's kind of like showing instead of telling. That's kind of like telling instead of showing. The man's frozen fingers could not clutch. That's kind of like showing. I like that. By stating the physical failure as a blunt, mechanical fact, the horror becomes twice as real. It reads like a diagnostic report on a failing piece of machinery. There's a parallel here from the writing. This is exactly like her choice to specify the green LED blinking precisely every 300 milliseconds is grounded in cold, hard reality before the chaos hits. Physical alien. It's almost like a countdown to chaos, that scene, that chapter. Physical alienation, the body as an object. He looked down at them and it occurred to him that that's deep. They were no longer part of his body. Pain as a reward. Wow. London could write like this because, like you thinking out your chapter this morning, he knew the physical layout of the scene before he wrote it. He didn't have to guess what freezing fingers felt like. He remembered the exact mechanics of it. When you write with that level of physical authority, whether it's a man beating his arms against his sides in the Yukon, or John Bevan slamming a Sub-Zero cryoblastoster at a giant green roach in a basement, which I've actually seen this before. That's kind of part of my memories in life. The prose stops feeling like writing and starts feeling like survival. So, grab some Melville where they spear at a whale. Now we'll see a scene that matches the absolute sensory violence and kinetic chaos of your roach hunt, but scaled up to the oceanic and mythic. We have to go to chapter 61 of Herman Melville's Moby Dick, Stubb Kills a Whale. The red tide now poured from all sides of the monster. like brooks down a hill. His colors parted fast from being black. He became a hueless, death-like gray. Whip the line, cried Stubb to the tub oarsman. He's going to sink. Dart, dart, oh, Judea, dart. The lance was darted. A second, a third, and free of the line. Starbuck's iron flew over the whale's fin. The smoke from the line tub now violently turned into a dark blue smoke. So on and so forth. But it makes me wonder, in crafting, should the green roach scene be comedic and terrorizing, or apocalyptic, or omenic. That is the foundational question for the entire tone of your book. In a high-level creative workspace, this is where you decide whether the green roach is just a pest or if it's the thematic linchpin of the whole chapter. You never see green roaches. In fact, a lot of times people see those as a sign in psychology. I think it's a psychologist who had a patient sees a green bug. Because you compose this scene in your head, the elements are already flexible. You can tune the dials to make that insect mean completely different things to the reader. Comedic and terrorizing, lived in reality. Apocalyptic, the invasive decay. Omenic, symbolic, the system intruder. Start with comedic terror, but let it resolve into an omen. That might be something. You're gonna have to decide if you use AI to write or not. You're gonna have to. Or if you're gonna learn enough to not use it. I'm just some dude who has a 2026. You're gonna face a fork in the road where you're either using AI or you're not, and that's gonna have path A, learning enough to not use it. You're gonna want to be a purist or artisan. You can sit down to blank paper. You can do it all. And part of that be using AI as a mirror and a sparring partner, as a director, and then maybe you sit down and write. The ultimate advice: don't use AI to escape the hard work of thinking. The thinking I did this morning, no paper, no tablet, just pure spatial imagination, is the most valuable part of the creative process. But yeah, this is 30 minutes of going over that thinking I did this morning. It's still, if I was not in such a bad situation in life, I would probably now